Luke, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Mate, really pleased to have you on board and very much looking forward to hearing and sharing a bit of your story here. So, mate, tell us a bit about yourself.
I mean, you summarised it pretty loosely. I left school at 18. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I always had this fantasy of being a businessman in inverted commas. And my parents were very traditional in the sense that I was pretty clever. I had a lot going for me, but I didn't try very hard at school. So the prospect of me not going to university, it just didn't make any sense to them or my extended family. So when I said I'm joining the police, despite the fact that both my parents were nurses and we've got a lot of public sector people in the family. My grandfather was a teacher, for example. There was always this idea that I was destined for something a little bit different, but I didn't agree. I went off and joined the police, and I worked in Croydon in South London, which you would have seen the news a few years back when we had the big riots in 2000 and I don't even remember what year it was.
Yep.
But they centred largely in the borough and the town that I worked in. So after 7 years of working in the police, I kind of decided I'd had enough. There was a few things that had gone wrong for me in the police, and I just knew it was not the place for me to be going forward as a family man. And I was destined for different or greater things, depending on how you look at it. And I happened to be going through my junk email one day, and I had an email in there from a garden franchise, and I think you guys have a big gardening franchise over there, don't you? I can't remember. Jim's Mowing, is it?
Yeah, Jim's Mowing is a huge franchise. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So this franchise in the UK is attempting to be as big as Jim's, which is no small challenge. So I went down to this tiny little village on the south coast of England and met with the owner of the franchise, and partly because of how he sold it, but partly because of my desire just to go. I pretty much said yes there and then. I sold my house and moved to a rented flat in order to release some money to set the business up. Mm-hmm. And I ran that for about 3.5 years before looking for something else. Yeah. And a former colleague of mine from the police had previously left to work with a security company in the town that we both worked in Croydon, and he wasn't enjoying where he was. So we were talking, and like blokes do over a pint or two, we sort of had, shall we do it? Shall we do it? Shall we do it? And this happened for 6-9 months before finally he'd had enough, and I'd had enough of what I was doing, and we just did it. And I think my biggest learning really from that was just how much I'm just a typical boy. So we set this shiny new business up, and I'm very honest about it now. I neglected the team that I had in the gardening business. I had a team of 3 people working sort of with me, beneath me, however you want to put it, which doesn't sound enormous, but in sort of 3.5-4 years was quite fast going. We were a pretty well known team, and we were doing okay. I could have carried on doing that forever and been relatively comfortable. But I saw this shiny new business and just neglected the boys. So very quickly they started jumping ship. And because I was so focused on growing this business, and I could see the potential for the business and the size and the acclaim that it could bring me, and all those things that I was lacking in, I suppose, just gardening. So very quickly that business that I'd worked so hard and had been so instrumental in getting me out of a job that was, slowly killing me, was dying a death. So it got to a point, and I was down in Southampton on the south coast in the UK, and recruiting for our first big security job. And I was really excited because I'd had no experience in the security industry, and all of a sudden I'd been asked by the driver, who I knew of a billionaire, to come and provide all the security at their house. I'm thinking, this is amazing. This is what a way to enter the industry. Wow. And I got a text off my number one guy in the gardening business saying, "Look, mate, I'm off." I said, "Okay, Timing. Right, cheers, mate. When are you going?" He said 12 days. So the world just fell out of my rear end, because while the security company was growing, we certainly weren't taking any money. at that point. We were in that exciting but horrible stage where the business is making money, but you're just watching it recycle within the business.
Yeah. So first comment. I mean, I love this whole. I was having a pint with my mate, and and how many great ideas start like that, right? I saw a really great expression the other day saying, alcohol, because no great story ever started with two blokes eating a salad, and
yeah, exactly.
There's something there. It's, maybe it's just the creativity of it all, but that's always a bit of fun. But take me back for a second. Going into the police force, is obviously, and I had a brother who was in the police force. He was also ex-military. You got to have a certain sort of thing about you to be able to go and get into a career like that. Was there anything particularly that led you down that path?
To joining the police?
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever got it over there, but there was a show on TV here called The Bill, which
yes.
I don't even know why we call the police here the old Bill. There is a reason. It'll be a Cockney rhyming slang thing. But I used to watch that as a kid, and I loved it. And I can still recall certain horror episodes. There was an episode and it's silly, really, because the episodes I remember, the ones where the bad things happened to the policeman. A guy called Dave Quinlan got stabbed, and I just remember I bought into that. I've never been a soap opera guy. I've never watched any of the soaps, but The Bill really, I loved it. And I think at the time I didn't realise, but I've got a real hero complex. I've got to go and save people, which. It's a disastrous thing to have on a personal level. It's great in the moment, but when you realise you're just like a big sponge absorbing everyone else's grief, it's not so good. But yeah, that was pretty much it. I used to watch a telly program, and I liked the idea of doing it, and I just thought it'd be fun.
Yeah, interesting. And by the way, I think that hero complex thing is, however you want to phrase that, is actually a very common thing amongst entrepreneurs.
Yeah. You're there to fix things, right?
That's right. I'm a massive believer that entrepreneurs are the ones who actually change the world. Yep. They're the ones that look and see stuff out there and go, that's not good enough. I can do better. Yep. And then they go on and take on all sorts of risk, pour in ridiculous amounts of hours, effort, things that most people would consider insane, so they can go and solve a problem. And, I guess probably one of the big challenges is that maybe not enough of them get rewarded for all that. But that's a discussion for another day, perhaps.
That's a big society problem there. Greater than me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, with the police force, did it stack up to what you imagined it would be like initially?
No. I mean, public service work in this country, it has a bit of a bad rep, and a lot of things in this country have a bit of a bad rep, and the general public feeling about them is normally quite negative. We're quite a negative population of people. If we can't moan about something, we're unhappy. But no, it didn't. I tend to summarise it, because otherwise I do tend to waffle. But I summarise it as I loved the job, as in the day-to-day job. I loved it. Even the rubbish calls that we would go to, a call would come out over the radio or onto the little box in the car, and it would suggest that it was one thing, and you'd arrive and it would be completely different. And you're like, how's that happened? But I've got so many cool stories that I tell people, and just there's always things that I learned from. I realise that now when I talk to people about situations, and I can go back to that time and think, there was that time when X, Y, or Z happened, and I realised this as a result of it, which then moves on to help me now. So so I love the job, but working for the organisation, working for the UK government, you're always between a rock and a hard place, and I think no more so than in the police, where every situation you go into, you come out and one half of that situation doesn't like you, unless you've made a complete Belgium neutral decision. One of them doesn't like you at some point, so it's quite damning. And then without going into too much detail, the organisation didn't really look after its employees, and that's why now you have just enormous numbers of attrition from certainly from the Met in London. I only have to go and look on LinkedIn and see just how many of my former colleagues are now working in in actually really good jobs. So it's a good thing. If you can reframe it, you can sit there and say, "Oh, it was terrible that the police service treated me or worked with me the way they did."
Yeah, and look, and there's good and bad in everything, and you know, I think people who go into things expecting perfection are always going to be disappointed, right? But I'm interested because it's, you know, this analogy. The analogy of people who've been in either military, police, and even professional kind of sports people, I see this sort of consistency in people who have had a lot of regimentation in their professional life, and how well that often translates into actually running a business. Have you found? Did you find any kind of connection like that yourself?
I agree. There is that massive correlation between people who have worked in the sorts of jobs that you mentioned, military, police, professional sports, that sort of thing. I would probably disagree that it's because of the regimented nature of them. Well, certainly for me, because I'm not particularly regimented. I am arguably the least regimented person you'll ever meet. I need a kick up the rear end to get anything done. But I'm one of these people that from school to now, if there's a deadline, I start the piece of work at the last possible moment for me to be able to get it done in time. And I think the reason I would cite as why people from the police and military, etc., do well in business is because they're used to a world where the stakes are high. So if you succeed, certainly for the military and to a lesser extent the police, if you succeed, you live. If you don't succeed, you die. Professional sports people, if you succeed, you get the World Cup or whatever. If you don't, you're insignificant to a large extent. You know, nobody remembers the bottom 97% of footballers. They just remember the top three. So it's the stakes for me.
Yeah, the also ran. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, and that sort of somewhat leads me because making the jump from I'm going to use this term loosely, stable employment. I mean, you're stably employed in an environment that can be quite chaotic and hostile, and as you said, you turn up and it's flipped on its head and it's completely different. So, and I think there'd be lots of stories I'm sure you can share around that another time, but it's giving up what I'll call stable employment and then just jumping into your own business. I know from my own experience, people used to look at me and they'd kind of had this curious look and go, wow, that's really brave. And I'd always struggle with that because in my head, when I went into business, I had no other choice. I just had the thought of continuing to do what I was doing seemed insane. What was your experience? What was it like doing that transition for you?
Yeah, the same. People would look at me and they would say things like, that's really brave. And what they would mean is, you're insane. I mean, why are you doing this? So, like I said, my police career started when I left school. There was a brief interim period while I was going through the application process, but I had, aside from working as a Saturday boy in a bike shop, which by the way was the oldest bike shop in the world, Guinness World Record. So that's my little claim to fame. Aside from that, I'd never worked in a business. I had never worked in a company and seen how companies worked. I've worked in a big organisation, but the end goal of that isn't selling or making money. So I went from working in the police, doing that very unique job, to running a business. But not only that, I was working in a business that I had never experienced before. I'd never used a gardener. I'd never had any money to employ the services of someone to mow my lawn. I'd just done it myself. So I'd never run a business. I'd never experienced the gardening business. But also I moved house at the same time. My now ex-wife and wife at the time left me during this process and moved down to where we now live on the south coast. And I did that boy thing of trying to fix it by doing something amazing and different. Moved down to the south coast with her. So I was in a town I'd never been in before either. So it was like life started again. So people were looking at me going, "Are you sure?" Because it seems a bit Yeah,
You're bonkers. Yeah.
I'd been in the police for long enough, and I worked in London where we used to get a bit extra money. That, like you say, it was comfortable, stable employment. If I didn't put a foot wrong, I'd have been there for 30 years and had a really good pension out of it. I probably would have died during it, not because of an incident at work, but just because of the stress. But you're right, and people would look at me a bit funny and go, "You're brave, you're insane." So yeah, I had exactly the same experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's I've seen various versions of this, but there's lists people have created that talk about events in life that are the most stressful things that can happen to you, right? So, and literally, they put these points and whatever, and so you can stack up, how many events you're going through at any one point in time. And if your score is over a certain threshold, then, psychologically, you're in a kind of very fragile place. It's quite, quite a risky place to be. And, top of that list, of course, is a death of a loved one. But, other than that, you've got divorce, changing jobs, moving house, strange environments, moving to, when you're in a strange environment where you're out of your depth and you don't know people and you've lost all your support network. So if I start ticking things off here, mate, you've changed jobs, got into a new business, which in itself you'd never done before. You've gone through a divorce. You've changed town, sold house, moved. You might as well join the circus.
That's what it is. But I mean, funny enough, you mentioned it before we started recording. You mentioned about if I was up early this morning anyway, so I may as well lump some extra stuff in and get all the bad things out of the way. So I've done my exercise this morning. Not the bad things, because I'm about to say that about to list this podcast as number 2. Tasks for the day.
That's all right. We'll get to the end.
Luke Brice didn't exist. So I've got this morning. I've done my exercise. I've got on the podcast and I've got a networking thing. So by 8:30 this morning, I'll have done all those things. I've got it out of the way, and I can go and chillax. Same thing with then. If you're going to do a life-changing event, don't string it out and spend 5 years changing your life. Do it in a summer.
Yeah. And look, isn't that a good point, right? I mean, rip the Band-Aid off, whatever, metaphor you want to use, but if you've got stuff to do, you might as well just get on with it. And funnily enough, often when you do that, right, it actually is never as bad as what maybe you thought of anyway. You get
caught up in it.
Tends to be the answer to most problems.
You don't tend to have the opportunity to step back and be objective about it. When I look back now, I remember times being out on the road, and I was working part time because a good friend of mine, Ollie in the police, he said to me, "Luke, don't quit. Just go part time at first, just in case you hate it." And begrudgingly, because I'm so just do it. I thought, do you know what? He does know what he's on about. He is a clever guy. I am not. He's probably right. So I did, but then I quickly realised that I was absolutely knackered. I was working nights and weekends in the police and cutting grass during the day. But looking back, I do realise that it was quite overwhelming that period of time. I remember days where I was just sat there in the van, like I don't want to get out of the van, which is this. It's a bad sign 3 weeks into a new gig, isn't it? But I think it was just, like you say, that list of big life events all being at once, it came on top of it a little bit, but we're here now.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating. So fast forward. So talk me through, you've had a colleague that's come to you, you've been doing the gardening business for a while. To the layman, to the guy standing on the outside here, ex-police, security, clear connection there. Is it as obvious as it sounds? Was that transition easy for you? What did that look like?
I don't really know how much to say. I don't want to give away the secret, not to the competitors, but just to the clients. If I'm honest, no. I'll be honest. The police thing it's a good hook. People automatically it breaks down a barrier, and as we've discussed, there are a lot of people who are ex-military and ex-police in positions of power in other businesses. So it's a great way of having just literally breaking down that first 10% of a conversation with someone. The number of times I've gone to a potential client and they are either ex-police, ex-military, or have some connection, and it's almost like you're a distant relative. Instantly, there's that level of trust. Our ability to run the company from a security position, that is increased as well. obviously, and we go into meetings with the police for big events that we run. We're closing a big road in South London a lot at the moment, to sort of help bounce back from the COVIDs. And we have these conversations with the police and the countless error guys, and they, as soon as we start talking, they realise, all right, you do know what you're talking about. And it's not to say that they then just skip on. It just means it's much easier. So yeah, the police and security do largely go hand in hand. You still need to be able to run a business, which is, the core of it. So just being a copper doesn't mean that you could just leave and run a security company. But yeah, it does help. And the group.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I appreciate you.
The group it's called the blue light group, because you have blue lights on the top of a car, and that's how unimaginative we are. It just it made sense, and I've been out of the police now for 7 years, which is pretty much as long as I was in. So I've been out as long as I was in. So you could argue it's not really relevant anymore, is it, Luke? But it is, because those things stay with you. But yeah, it's.
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting, and I appreciate your openness on that. And I think at the end of the day, for people to do business with other people, they're looking for certain problems to be solved, and they're looking to, in my head anyway, you keep stacking up enough Lego blocks until you've got a picture, you've got enough to build a relationship on, right? And I think the fact that you've been in the police ticks a box that, okay, you've been around, you've seen stuff, you are qualified to be having this conversation, right? It doesn't mean you're going to get the gig. It just means that that's one hurdle that you clear fairly quickly without having to establish that you've got the experience. I don't need to
tell my kind of credentials. Just having been there and done it is largely enough. And I could have been sacked for all they know, but they don't tend to assume that, which is nice.
Well, and frankly, even if you had been sacked, it doesn't mean that you didn't take a lot away and learn from it. I mean, people lose employment for various reasons, and sometimes it's just a misalignment. So I don't tend to over sort of analyse that stuff, but that's interesting. And so your mate came along. So at this stage, you're starting a new company. You're probably at least at this stage going, well, I've kind of sort of half done a little bit of this stuff before now. Not my first rodeo. You start a company. Is it 50-50? What did that sort of look like when you structured the business?
Strangely enough, I had helped. So my business partner is Sean, and I had helped Sean when he went to work with this previous security company, because the guy he went to work for at the time, he was nuts. He was absolutely nuts and had no idea, and lied to Sean through his teeth about the sorts of things that he had going on. He was talking about this big contract with a big construction company. Which didn't exist. He was talking about this £1 million contract with a big construction company. Ironically enough, who we now have a big contract with our new company. So it's like, hey, it's all come full circle. But so Sean, when he left the police, he left a couple of years after I did, and I had learnt a few things about running a business, albeit in completely different industries in different parts of the country. But I was able at that time to help him to an extent. Employ some systems and some ways of working that helped him with the security company. I'm not suggesting for a second that my input had any more than 1% to do with the success of his previous business, but he knew that I knew what I was talking about. And he at that point he was somewhat unhappy with his circumstance. He had become a part owner of that business, but still his relationship with his then business partner wasn't so good. So we had our little chat. So the business is 50-50. Despite my lack of security company experience, I think it's I'd proved myself to everyone that I could pick something new up and learn it and run with it pretty quickly. So it made no sense to be anything other than 50-50 at the time.
Yeah. Well, look, in terms of career change, life change, direction change, I reckon there'll be a lot of listeners, a lot of business owners nodding their head right now going, yep, been there, remember that, completely deep end, no idea. And once again, I think this comes back to the kind of fabric of what makes up an entrepreneur, right? Is these people who are willing to go and, blaze a new trail and do it different and do it their own way. So I think that's pretty cool. So what year was it that you and Sean hooked up together?
Is that right? No, I'll tell a lie. Sorry, I'm lying. Do you know what?
Okay, so
a couple of our passwords for the business stuff have the year that we incorporated in, which is 2018. Somehow I mean, I won't tell you. I won't tell you the first.
Okay, I think you need to change those now, though.
They're old passwords. But yeah, no, 2018. This is 2018. Sorry.
Yeah, cool. So yeah. Somebody's quickly changing their passwords in the background now. So yeah. Yeah, anybody getting spam email from Luke, just ignore it for the next week. Yeah, okay, so 2018, so you started a security company, and talk to me a little bit about security, right? I see lots of different kind of security style firms out there who do different stuff. So what does the Blue Light Group focus on?
Security. So we don't do alarms and tech, that type of stuff. We have been asked to in the past, and we've kind of brought other companies that we trust in to help with it, because in those situations, it's not a case of we're competing against the tech. It's more of a case we're working with the tech at the same time. So we'd rather do it with someone who we know, like, and trust. But loosely speaking, we provide and manage is probably the better way of describing it. But we provide and manage staff to places like construction sites, office blocks, shopping centres, high net worth individuals, events. I mean, people always instantly think that we do bar and club doors, but we've actually only got two little wine bars, both in Croydon, where we used to work, and they're just nice places to go. They're in that nice space where they're a bit more expensive for the drink, so it filters out the crap. So the guys on the door don't really have too much hard work to do until people start getting too much booze in them. But we're not interested in the griefy ones. But tends to be high volume, large scale people provision.
Yeah, interesting. It's such a diverse area, security. I mean, that I'm a big believer in looking at the macro kind of world. Yeah. Like, what are the big things going on in the world? Because that's what drives business, right? Needs are created, etc. And security, along with health, fundamentally, are two of those mega trends that are just. And security, of course, goes, as you said, tech, securing property, securing people, right through to things like, food security, for countries and stuff like that. So it's a fascinating area. Especially throw over all the geopolitical stuff going on at the moment. But so you've been going since 2018. How big is the company now? What sort of staff? Turnover. If you're happy to talk about that, but how big is it?
We literally just finished our third year of trading, so our financial year runs June to May, and I used to be quite excited about that. Looking at the accounts, because year one we turned over, I think about 5 times what we expected to. Because we had pretty low expectations, really. We were starting from scratch, but we did okay. Year two, we multiplied that turnover by 5, so we grew 5 times in year two, and then not long into year two, COVID hit, and not long into year three, COVID hit, and we've grown by about 7%. So we've growing by 500% to growing by 7%, which people keep telling me, stop moaning about it, Luke, because you're doing all right. But it's, I know, right?
Well, growth is certainly better than the alternative. It's better than negative growth. I've been told that if you're not growing, you're shrinking. So the fact that we're growing at all during a period of time which has been as uncertain as it has for a lot of businesses, it does comfort me to an extent, but I suppose the idiot or the little boy in me just wants it to get bigger and better. But in terms of turnover and size, we turn over just over £1 million a year, which, I mean, I don't know what that is in Aussie dollars. It used to be double. Yeah. Squillions, mate. With the Aussie peso is not exactly.
So just over
anything to write home about.
We've got something in the region of 60 to 70 staff across the company, and they range from full-time staff to guys who literally just work on a door on the weekend for 20 hours a week, or 10 hours a week rather. It's pretty broad.
Cool.
We're not enormous, but we're certainly not small, and I tend to focus on the growth of the business as opposed to the size, because we're only 3 years old, and it's like judging a toddler on how tall they are. It's not possible for them to be a 6 foot tall kid.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So when you started this business with Sean, did you guys have some kind of an end game
For Sean, his
strategy,
exit strategy was
to begin with?
retrospective, if that makes sense. It was about him. The goal of this business was for him to exit his previous business. It was a means to an end. He needed to get out, and much the same as me with my exit from the police.
Gotcha.
It was a bit of a lifesaver because he was so stressed with his previous business partner. He ended up in hospital with heart problems. So for him, he wasn't thinking a year down the line. He was thinking in the moment, I need to get out. I need to get out and do something that I'm already doing that I know, and be able to live both, financially and physically. That has changed since then, obviously, since the sort of the dark days of the previous company, and we can actually start looking forward. There's no firm strategy in place. There's no firm date for either of us to be gone from the business. We've very, very loosely sort of thrown the idea out there. What would it take for us to sell? And I'll be honest, it's far more than anyone would offer us at this current moment, just because we're both pretty young, both sort of early to mid 30s. It would take a lot of money for us to be able to live off it forever. So there's no huge focus on that exit strategy at the moment. It doesn't mean that it couldn't happen sooner than we're thinking, but it's not a consideration as we stand. We're more focused on growing the business for the immediate benefits as opposed to the longer term sales benefits.
Sure. So it was interesting. One of my previous guests, she built up this massive company in 6 years and sold it. And she said, we started day one saying we want to build something we can sell. But one of the interesting parts about it was that she talked about how things change. Nothing's ever a straight line, right? You can talk about, well, I want to sell it one day and I want to sell it for a certain amount, but actually even that requirement can change along the way. Do you see yourself potentially selling the business one day? Is that something that you're open to, or
me more than Sean,
or like the idea?
So I've realised in the last couple of years, I suppose, since those big life changes, that when people would ask me, what are your hobbies? What do you like doing? And I'm sitting there going, I don't actually know. But I've realised that I can really sort of summarise it as doing new things. I like to do new things. I get bored of things. ADHD is probably close to the diagnosis. I've done something for a little while, and I just been there, done that. Monotony and repetition, and that's part of the reason I fell out of love with the gardening, because my year could be spent. I could almost forecast the year. You start in March at the beginning of spring, and you start cutting lawns, and at this point of the year, you start doing hedges. Later on in the year, you're doing turfing, and then it's back to Christmas time. You're not really working for the next couple of months, and then we'll start again, and it's that cycle. And the idea of a cyclical life, it's almost counting down the revolutions till you stop. And it terrified me. So for me, doing new things is really what motivates me. So the fact that tail end of last year, we diversified from just a security company to the group of companies which now incorporates a cleaning / facilities management business, a Medicare business, which will provide medics to events and such things, and also like a small property ownership arm. But I also, I haven't mentioned it yet, but the guy I sold the gardening business to in 2019, he asked me last year during COVID, did I want to come back on board with him? Now, I wasn't expecting that, because why would you buy something and then ask the guy who sold it to you to come back on board? But he did, because he recognised that he's much more focused on the commercial side of the business, i.e. Commercial lawns, blocks of flats, offices, that sort of thing. Whereas the stuff I was doing was Mrs. Jones and her tiny little back garden. And I said, all right, why not? It was new again, because I hadn't done it for a year. So actually, I'm back involved with the business that I sold. Again, So pretty much, yeah. And my involvement is completely different to what it was.
Full cycle.
Previously, I was hands-on. I was the face of the business. I was really involved. Whereas now, I kind of I do the things that I want to do, which is just kind of tweak things a little bit. I'm in charge of how the marketing goes, and I'm in charge of sort of planning the business as opposed to being in the business, which is exactly where I want to be with it. Because quite frankly, the weather in this country is not reliable. I don't want to be out in the rain.
Yeah. Do you find going back to that business, is that in any way a sort of a distraction or taking you away from the focus on the security business?
With the guy I sold the business to, that I couldn't be held to account too much with the gardening business. I'm quite happy to come on board because more than anything, that hero savior complex thing again. More than anything, I hated the idea of having sold this business to him.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, it was in a bit of a rush. I mentioned earlier when my final member of staff told me he was off. It was a 12-day window, so I had 12 days to get rid of this business because it was either sell it in 12 days or just say to all the customers, I'm really sorry, go find someone else. And it wasn't a huge business, but it was. I would have felt like I was like 100 customers down and 100 regular customers plus all the extra people, and I didn't like the idea of losing this thing and it disappearing off the face of the earth. So when Mike called me last year and said, do you fancy coming back on board? I think I could help. I can help. I'll help. I'll do it for free. And I do it for free. I don't do it with any financial benefit. Obviously, at some stage there will be a time where I can do something with the business and get something out of it. But I'm lucky. I don't need to. I don't need to take any money from the business. It's not like it would. Yeah. It's not a driving factor. But no, it doesn't because I work everything around me. I work I work everything around home now. For so long I was policeman first and dad, husband, family member second or even lower than that. Whereas now it's completely opposite. So everything works around the kids, my fiance, etc. So yeah, I'm pretty good at saying no.
Yeah. Nice. Well, and that gives some context actually to the previous business. I mean, it sounds like you're in more of a mentor role. You're supporting. It's about almost kind of, I don't want to say paying it back. It's paying it forward, really, and continuing that sort of goodwill out there, which, it sounds to me like you very much have entrepreneur's disease. Love new things, love doing new stuff, but also like helping others and being involved in solving problems. And that's, such a common trait for what we see out there. So where does Blue Light Group go from here? I mean, have you got some big goals? What are you going to try and achieve with that business? We would
literally just on how much can we grow? How quick can we grow? How big can we make this? And how quickly can we make it big? We've kind of grown up a little bit and looked at more than just how big can the company get, because it's not so much about that. As everyone in the world's realised, it's about being stable enough to kind of ride out anything different. So the diversification last year is more than just adding a service to the business and making more money. I'm never about just making more money because someone could put a pound on my table here and I've made more money. It's so nondescript. But the idea for me, and I've spent a lot of time over the last year reading business books, which I've always dabbled with, but I do find them sometimes a little bit difficult, especially when they're a made up story trying to sell the idea. But you will have read, I've got no doubt, Start With Why.
Yep.
And there was another book I read a little while ago, but I can't remember the name of it. Yeah. And then there's a couple of other books that I've read recently. And
Simon Sinek.
The idea of building a business which runs without me. If I say that to my mum or dad, who have worked in the NHS as nurses, where every single person has to be working all the time for it to work, and if you lose a cog, the whole thing falls apart. I love the idea of my business not needing me, and it sounds strange because the hero complex. I need to be needed or wanted, but actually, if I have a business that I can then go on holiday for 3 months, if holidays were allowed, if I could go on holiday for 3 months and come back and the business be functioning as it was before, I think that is my ultimate goal. So that's my personal goal for the business. Our collective goal is building the new sides of the business up so that they complement the security business as much as the other way around, and so that in the event that there is another major worldwide event, or even not worldwide, even just locally, that the secondary and tertiary businesses can sort of pick up where the other one's dropping off, and just a bit of stability.
Yeah, it's and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but with some of the subtext, but it's there's this recurring theme through this podcast and the guests that we have on is that actually growth just for the sake of growth is actually pointless. Just being able to beat your chest and say, oh, we're now doing 10 million, now we're doing 20 million, like that has all the depth of a very narrow puddle. Whereas most business owners, and I think the people that I probably see that I think the most successful and the happiest, and success is not more money, it's the people who are the happiest are the ones that actually work out what kind of life they want and then have a business and build a business to deliver on it. And that just seems to be the common theme.
Entertain the idea of running a business. It was always about how much money could I make. But I was a kid then, and I mean mentally I'm still a big kid now, but I'm slightly more grown up and have have grown up a little bit. But now you're exactly right. If I think of any, I mean I have talks with people. I say talks like it's a sit down meeting. I go to the pub with people all the time, and we talk about potential new businesses. And I think probably every month someone talks to me about, we could do that, couldn't we? And it's never really very serious. In the same way that my conversations with Sean before the proper conversation were never really serious about setting up a security company. And I think a few years ago, if I'd been asked those questions like, shall we do X, Y, or Z, I'd have gone, let's go to Google. How much money can you make in X business? Whereas now, I just don't care, because fundamentally, these businesses that I run now support me, and I have a really nice lifestyle. Could I have more money? Yes. Could I have more holidays? Yes. Do I need them at the moment? No. My fiance, she is literally 2 weeks away from taking a full-time in-house job with one of her clients. She currently runs her own HR consultancy, but recognises that actually running the business is not what she is good at. She may well listen to this podcast. If she does, I'm quite happy saying that, because it's something that she's openly admitted. She's not very good at the accounts. She's not very good at organising things. She's not actually very good at holding her clients to account, which for a consultancy, it's not ideal. Yeah.
Well, I think and I think this is the nature of life. You can't be good at everything. And so the sooner that you can, the sooner we as individuals can come to terms with that fact and just accept that, hey, I'm actually good at this stuff, I'm okay at that stuff, and that other stuff, I'm really crap.
Exactly.
But the sooner you can work that out, the sooner you can stop doing things you're crap at and start enjoying your life more, right? So it's one of those interesting things. So looking back and I guess thinking about all your experience and everything that you've done, personal and business, sort of hardships, wins, all the rest of it. Is there one kind of piece of advice that you would share with your fellow entrepreneurs out there?
This before, but it's been a bit of a journey of self-discovery, the whole business world, because police life was you join the police and you do what you're told. And having come out, I now work, like I said, I work everything around me. So I think, when people talk about sort of bullies and things like that, and they say, if you own or just acknowledge your negative attributes or whatever, people then can't use it against you. You can actually see it as a positive. I watched an amazing program. It's called Love on the Spectrum, and funnily enough, it's an Australian program. And the guys on it, they're talking about their autism, and they're saying, I'm autistic, and therefore I'm really good at this, that, and the other. And all of a sudden, being autistic isn't a negative. It's like I'm crazy good at maths, or I'm really good at solving problems, etc. So for me, my boredom, or if you will, or my inability to just sit still and do the same thing, a lot of people would see that as a negative. And up until I kind of thought about it and talked about it with mainly my fiance and other people, I would have seen that as a negative, because everyone was saying you need to calm down, you need to pick something and stick with it. Whereas now, I mean, this podcast is pretty much named after what I've realised is what I like to do. I like to build it and then get rid of it, and I see that as a positive. So I guess, to summarise, just do what makes you happy, because if it's making you happy, there's nothing wrong with it. And if it's not making you happy, if you're slogging your guts out for something, it's pointless. Yeah. And I listened to a comedy show yesterday, and they were talking about Elon Musk and about all the crazy things he does, like, you know, sending a car into space, and he does some crazy wild stuff. And someone said to him, why do you do this? You're like you keep competing for being the richest guy in the world, but you do silly things like sending a car into space and such things. And he says, but because it's silly, and I like doing silly things. And ultimately, him liking doing silly things and different things has made him the second richest guy in the world. And if he was doing what everyone else told him to do, he wouldn't be him. So yeah, do what makes you happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty much.
Yeah, great advice. You know,
even if you're not good at
it makes you happy, you'll be good at it.
It makes you happy. I'm crap at golf.
and usually the other stuff will take care of itself, right? Luke.
No, I zigzag. Yeah.
I don't call what I do on a golf course actually golf. It's something really, yeah. Well, it sounds like we'd probably play well together. So, mate, thanks for sharing your story, your time, your insights. You know, there'd be a lot of people out there hearing this who will really relate to your journey and just the various obstacles that life puts in our way, right? Mate. So, mate, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on.